Today on Adorama Live on No Film School, we sit down with a panel to discuss how cinematography has a continually expanding role in the industry. But first, I sit down with Sony to go over what they offer in their mirrorless camera lines. This is Adorama Live on No Film School. Welcome to Adorama Live on No Film School, where we talk with filmmakers and video professionals about techniques and technology. I am your host, Stephen Pierce, here on the floor of NAB 2019 in Las Vegas. You can see all of the episodes of Adorama Live on nofilmschool.com, so please go check them all out. Sony may not have been first in the mirrorless camera game, but when I think about a mirrorless camera, I picture Sony. They not only changed how professionals think about how mirrorless cameras can work, they also changed the way that clients perceived mirrorless cameras, and proving that just because it's smaller doesn't mean that it's lesser. Joining me today from Sony is L. Dean Nadia. We're going to speak and get into what makes a Sony camera, or Sony mirrorless camera, so good. L. Dean, thank you very much for joining me here
Thanks
today.
for having us. I really appreciate it.
So you brought along the A9 today.
Yeah, I just brought my personal camera. We obviously have the whole lineup on our booth, and I was walking around taking some photos before coming here, obviously, for the session, and I thought it obviously makes a good prop, but they pretty much have a lot of the same technology throughout our entire lineup, so this is just a pretty picture, but we can go through some of the other models as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So what has made the Sony mirrorless camera so prevalent? I mean, I feel like it is, for me, it's pervasive. No matter where we go, people seem to always have Sony mirrorless cameras across the country.
Right. So, you know, we stuck a stake in the ground many, many years ago. You know, it's over 8 years ago we decided we were going to really pursue mirrorless as the future technology because there's so many more things that you could do with you know, removing mechanical components out of a product in order to make it more efficient and give it, you know, additional features and additional speed and basically make the user experience a lot greater. You know, I always assimilate it to the case of, you know, there used to be film cameras. There used to be, you know, horse and buggies as well, you know, and then we put engines in them, and we now had this mechanical device, and it, you know, became a lot better, and everybody's used to driving a car. You know, when you look at what's happening nowadays, everybody's moving towards electric cars, and you have a look at what Tesla's been doing and the strides that they've been doing. You know, the electric has so much more. Those cars are faster, they're more efficient, they handle better, they can drive by themselves, all these other cool things that they can do. And I assimilate it to the same in the camera industry. You know, once you start taking the limitations out of the camera, the engine is a limitation, the moving mirror is a limitation. Now you open up a world of, you know, basically possibilities of what you can take with an electronic product and with the components that we've developed to make those world class. Obviously, as you've seen, you know, we've taken the world by storm.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing you touched on there, like, legacy DSLRs, I'm calling them legacy now just because mirrorless has become such a new prevalent technology. Mirrorless cameras still struggle with battery life typically because they're using an EVF instead of a mirror any longer. And that's why they can be smaller, but that's a problem all manufacturers have to combat. What's Sony doing? Sure,
so there's actually a number of things that go into play in terms of mirrorless cameras. We didn't get it right the first time, right? But we've been doing it for a long time. You know, it puts us 8 years plus ahead of where our competition is at the moment because we've had those teething problems and we went through them. Power consumption was one of them. Everybody knows that the W series battery in the original full frame cameras were terrible. I mean, they were really terrible. Part of that was how the camera actually consumes power. With a DSLR, the only time it really consumes power is when the mirror lifts up and the image is taken. There's almost nothing that's used up while it's actually focusing. With the video system, you know, obviously you're exposing the sensor for a long time, and that consumes a lot of power as well in a mirrorless camera. The way that we approached it is not just developing, you know, bigger and heavier batteries because you know, you could throw something bigger into it, but then it almost takes away in what we're trying to achieve in not miniaturization. We don't want it to be too small. We want it to be optimized. But we also want to make sure that it's more efficient. So it's really the design of the Sony sensor. You know, we're the world's largest sensor manufacturer. Our sensors appear not only in our cameras, but in, you know, everything from cell phones to you know, automobiles to, you know, many of our competitors actually use our sensors in their cameras. but we're trying to optimize the power consumption from the sensor level. You know, the way that the sensor is designed, the way that it consumes power in the analog to digital conversion, and then what happens with that once it goes to the camera, the rest of the camera. The entire circuitry is designed to optimize every little component from the time that that signal gets sent through to the processor. What happens with that signal? How does it, you know, how is that wiring wired on the actual circuit board? And we've actually found that rewiring circuit boards or redesigning circuit boards to you know, when and how power is being consumed for, when it's consuming for focus, when it's consuming for processing, when it's consumed for writing to the actual media card. Everything is optimized throughout the entire process. So now that we come out with our third generation cameras, the A9, the A7 Mark III, the A7R Mark III, we included the Z series battery, the Z100. That's 2.2 times the capacity of the previous battery, even though we didn't change the size of the camera. But in addition to that, the cameras actually perform a lot further than that. So we didn't just double the performance of the battery life. It wasn't just the battery doubling the performance. It's, you know, 3 to 4 times that, but it's not just from the battery, it's also from how the camera is designed from the ground up. So we're seeing a lot of new entries into the market. You know, obviously seeing that mirrorless is the future. We used to say mirrorless is the future, and the mirrorless is actually now.
Now, it's happening. I think the last couple of years it's become...
Absolutely.
Yeah, probably the leading type of small.
Yeah, and we see that's probably the number one thing that they're really struggling with is the power consumption. And that also transcends to the lens, because the lens consumes power as well.
Right,
so, yeah.
And you guys specifically talking about the lens. The lens is a big part of what Sony does across their entire line, right?
Correct. So, you know, when you have a look at our lens lineup, and if you go down to our booth and you'll have a look at how many lenses we do have 2 systems of lenses. We're only showing the one system over here. We have the A-mount lenses, which is basically our legacy lens from the Minolta system that we then adopted when we started the Alpha lineup. That's for DSLR type cameras. Our mirrorless system, when we first launched it, we have a long history. Sony, you know, walking around NAB, it's the largest booth at NAB. We have a long history in terms of making video cameras and video production. So we knew that when we were going to make a true mirrorless camera, it needed to do both. You know, the convergence of a still camera and a video camera, you know, it happened specifically with mirrorless. There were DSLRs that were starting to shoot video, not the greatest experience, but it was something that people liked because you could get a full frame sensor and you could, you know, your lens choices were so great. So there's a number of things that we approached with the lens design, you know, specifically looking at it has to perform better than any other lens on the market for still photography as well as video photography. So we take out that rotational focus system, we use linear focus systems, you know, our direct drive supersonic wave motors, you know, they're 100% quiet, they're extremely fast, faster than any other focus system, and they're also repeatable, you know, and they can track focus over time. A lot of what we're seeing on DSLR cameras is that as we advance with the performance, and specifically if you have a look at a camera like the A9, can shoot at 20 frames a second in still mode. Right. When we put on a DSLR lens, some other manufacturer with a mount system, by the way, that's also the big benefit of the E-mount system is the short flange back distance, which I'll talk about in a second. But when you put on a adapter to go to another lens, we'll take a competitor's lens and put it on the A9 and it'll perform faster on our camera than it can perform on their camera. But it doesn't perform as fast as our lenses. So at that stage, we know that it's not the camera that's holding it back, it's actually the lens that's holding the performance back. Right,
and the flange again is just because the distance there allows you to adapt it to many different types.
Correct,
right?
So the mirror obviously takes up space from the plane of the sensor to where the flange of the lens is, then mirror has to move up in between. Once you take that mirror out of it, now you can move the lens closer to the flange. So we have an 18mm flange back, that's from the sensor plane to the flange of the lens. So if you take a legacy lens and you put it on, let's say you take a lens that's got a 43mm flange distance,
yes.
All you need to do with that adapter is make up that distance. Now there's other things that you put in the adapter as well, for instance electronic pass-through, electronic control, so that we can control the image stabilization, the focus and the iris of that lens as well.
Right.
So the beauty of the system is it almost makes it open source. You can literally put any lens, including PL and B, you can put any lens onto these cameras, and we've seen these used in, you know, major motion picture film production.
Right. I mean, and on that note, we have a couple quick quick things I want to get in here as well. The E-mount is across the whole line. Right?
That is correct. So that's really the beauty of the system. So we started in the system with APS-C size lenses, or APS-C size sensors and cameras, but we planned ahead. We knew that we were going to go to a full frame model. So the circular diameter was actually designed for a full frame lens looking forward. So when we came out with full frame cameras, we now have the same mount that's used on APS-C, that's used on the FS series, the Super 35 models, that's used on our full frame cameras, including full frame cameras like the Venice. So that system is not only forward and backwards compatible, but it's also a cross between
cinema,
still and cinema. It's a cross between small sensor and large sensor. And it really opens up the world to producers who want to use multiple cameras in different productions. I know producers who will show up on set and they have a Venice, and they're using a lens on the Venice, and then they have their still camera and they go, I'd really want to grab this shot with maybe a macro. I have it on my still camera, take it off, stick it in my Venice, I can shoot it.
Which is incredible. Last thing I really want to touch on is you just received, or just a notable update came out for the A9 recently. What did that
Well, that's another real thing about a mirrorless camera. It's basically a little supercomputer that's inside there. It's a sensor, but the processor, the BeyondX processing engine, is really what drives our cameras to make them higher performance. And we can update those over time. So the A9 really took the world by storm, followed by the A7 series. Obviously we made tremendous inroads with the A7S II and then with the A7 Mark II and the A7R Mark II. But then when the A9 came out, we updated so much. And that's now been rejuvenated. The cameras have now had, it's on version 5.0 software. It includes artificial intelligence. It makes the camera literally, beyond anything when it comes to autofocus. And we also improve menu systems. We've improved, there was 29 updates to this alone, also including things like intervalometer for time-lapse sequences that you can produce. And we're doing the same update at the end of this month with the the A7R Mark III and the A7 Mark III to give those cameras enhancements, including eye autofocus, which Sony is renowned for having the best eye autofocus in the industry, as well as updates to video features and improving our algorithms for better image quality. So when you buy the camera, you can be rest assured that when the next one comes out, you don't have to just update to a new camera to get the new technology. We will actually update the technology as we go along. So your investment lasts for a lot longer.
Well, that's amazing. Thank you very much for coming by, Eldine, and bringing the A9 to look at and speaking with me.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Yep.
One of the things about mirrorless cameras that makes them so awesome is their small form factor. It makes them great for travel, so you can do photography or video in remote locations. Let's take a look at something that was shot on the A7R III recently by a colleague of ours in Africa. Yeah!
This trip is an opportunity for people to learn about what ethical travel photography looks like through experience. It's also an opportunity for people to challenge stereotypes or assumptions that they may have about Kenya and see nonprofit work on the ground. This makes people more thoughtful photographers. I hope that they are more intentional when they click that shutter.
Cinematography isn't just pointing a camera and a lens at something and trying to get it in focus. It is not just trying to slam lights into a subject or a thing and trying to expose it so you can see it. It's more deliberate than that. It's like trying to construct a painting with multiple people all holding different brushes at the same time. So to discuss the ever-expanding nature of cinematography, especially with all of the new technology coming out, I've put together a panel of friends here to help me go over the subjects. First of all, we have the Advanced Production Technical Specialist of the International Cinematographer Guild, Michael Chambliss. Hello, Michael.
Good morning.
Also, Sheila Smith, Director of Photography. Thank you for being here, Sheila.
Thank you.
And Stephen Poster, the National President of the International Cinematographers Guild.
It's a pleasure to see you again.
Thank you again for being here again, Steve. So I want to start kind of off about technology first. Like, camera technology is going a long way. There, we just looked at mirrorless cameras. You have everything from these small, tiny things to people's phones to the large, huge formats coming out in digital cinema. How does that affect the way a cinematographer has to approach their work?
You know, we have a lot more to choose from these days in terms of the technologies and the equipment within those technologies, and it's expanding exponentially. We are getting lenses, we are getting camera bodies, we are getting new technologies. We're going to overlay all of that with the new 5G technology. It's really an exciting time.
So 5G specifically, you're talking about transmission technology.
And transfer of information. It's exponentially faster.
Yeah, when you think of 5G as actually a new type of networking design. And so it's going to facilitate not only the transmission of images, but the control of the cameras themselves. And so there's a whole new layer of technology that's going to come on here with 5G. But one of the biggest changes that we've really had in cameras has been the shift to larger sensors and faster sensors, and that has impacted the camera department in a variety of ways. Sheila, you can probably talk about some of your experiences. How has your work changed with the larger sensor cameras?
Well, you can do a lot more than you could before, like exteriors, daytime exteriors are more easily captured because you have more latitude in the stops. You know, you shoot log and you've got 15 stops of latitude. You can be less afraid for your exposures, and but you also have to remember at the end of the day you're still operating a camera like like we always have in the old school, and it's all about framing and getting into the story, trying to capture the director's vision and being disciplined with that and not getting bogged down on what's the latest, greatest thing that's been invented.
Yeah, absolutely. Technology is just a tool. Cameras are just a tool. I think probably larger sensors, the thing they probably bring the most to the game is actually low light shooting, because it's going to totally change the way you would image something, like especially if you're shooting a dark and moody scene, whereas before you have to sometimes have larger instruments to get the dynamic range you need. Now the sensor can do a lot more for you, right?
You know, it's not just the sensor, it's also the size of the pixels, and that makes a huge difference in the quality. And so when we're talking about 8K cameras, the K-Wars that I've talked about for years, when we talk about, for instance, 8K cameras, the best part of the 8K camera is you can down-res to 4K and get a better quality image. And that quality image really plays into the styles and the way that people are shooting these days, because it's that wide open look, and it has a much more of an ability to suspend disbelief within the image.
So that's a great question. I'd love to ask colorists, actually. Would you prefer have more resolution or better color science? Like
color depth. I'm done with resolution. Resolution, we've gone as far as we need to go with.
I completely agree with you.
We need more color depth.
Now, I think there are definitely scenarios. I spoke with Red recently also about this same subject, and there are scenarios where you should opt for, if you're looking for a certain data rate, trying to hit a certain amount of DIT size, or it's like space on whatever, but they'd opt to go for a higher resolution at the same compression rate, or a lower compression rate to equal the same size. It gets pretty technical, but they say at that point you'll get a better image, but that's a specific circumstance.
To shift the subject just a little bit on that, one of the things that larger sensors has made much more complex is lens choice, because you can no longer just assume that your lenses are going to cover the format choice that you are making with the larger sensor. And so it is made testing mandatory before going out on a shoot, because you can make all sorts of calls and you're going to discover vignetting in the corners, this sort of thing. And so it's even though now there's this incredible choice of lenses out there to be able to match up and have different looks with that, testing is absolutely required at this point.
I want to talk about a new type of camera technology that's really been coming out the last few years, and that's 360, 180, and VR. Larger formats, not just in the camera, but multiple cameras working together in tandem. What is your experience of that? Where do you think it's ultimately going?
Well, I think that 360 and VR and AR and all those new technologies drive data usage. And this is where the major companies are interested. They're interested in selling bandwidth. And so there is going to be a big push to have more interactive type of material, more interactive entertainment than in the past, because it will drive bandwidth. And that's something that we're going to see. And I think that you have that, and then you have our normal entertainment channels. And there's so much there's so much material out there, and so much need for this. There's this voracious worldwide market for entertainment, and so we're in a golden era right now where new technologies can come out and actually be adopted and used because everybody in the world wants them.
Yeah, 360 video, it's a whole new way of thinking about things. Divided into two different categories. One is the experiential category, and this is already seeing a lot of traction in sports, where you can have the seat at the game that you would not be able to have any other way. You know, it's one of the things 360 video can do is get everyone the $35,000 seat at the Super Bowl, where you can climb into the experience, and that gets tied into the advanced forms of audio that help make that experience be real. They're also using, some TV series are using 360 video for social media, for a behind the scenes, this is what's going on the set. Now, when you start to think about storytelling in 360 video, it's got to be an entirely new way of thinking about how to direct the viewer within that 360 environment. So it's a different shape of storytelling, it's a different type of directing. It's also a different type of acting. I've talked to actors who have worked in VR and 360 environments, and they're always on. And it's a whole new way for the performer to think about how they go about doing their part, because typically, you know, you're shooting overs, and the actors, if they're not on camera, they're relaxed. And all of a sudden, if it's a three-way conversation, they've got to become conscious of what is their react at every moment, you know, because they're never off camera, and that's a very significant shift in the craft.
One person could argue, or you could argue, that that's very theatrical, that that's going to kind of going back to almost a return to the beginning of that, because when you're on stage performing a play, you're on the whole time. You know, the only time you're off is whenever you walk off the stage.
But the difference that you have in 360 video is that it can be much more intimate than the theatrical experience. A very good one on that, I'm trying to come up with the title. Let's hear, Felix and Paul did Traveling While Black, you know, and that is a very nicely done, that's a 360 VR experience. And I think that anybody who wants to start to get a feeling for what this would do, you know, what this medium can do, that's a good place to, that's a good touchstone for where we are at this year.
I want to talk and shift a little bit now into LED lighting, because it's something that is really, it started a couple of years ago, and I think it's finally coming home. I think it's finally starting to totally and almost replace some of the standard fixtures that have been used. Used to be you'd have to set up a book light and have a 2K on. Now you can have a sky panel, a light mat, or a Gemini, and a ton less power. So how do you start strategizing, and how does it change the way you would shoot with LED technology?
Well, in my smaller world of independent features, it's a game changer, because I did a horror film last year and they wanted all these effects with lighting, and then the sun comes up right on cue, and we were able to do everything because we were able to get a sky panel, which would have taken, it would just been so costly and time consuming if we didn't have it. So yeah, it's the best thing, the best change in my last few years for my.
Do you think it's?
I just adopted it. I just didn't even bother checking it out. I just started using it, and it is so exciting because, first of all, the chips, as we've talked about, are nominally faster. And when you have a nominal speed of 800, in that range, and can go to 1600 or 3200. You have the ability to take, for instance, on Amityville, I would take a light gear strip and rip off 6 LEDs, put a battery to it, and I had a key light. And it's amazing at 3200 ISO. It's just amazing to be able to do that and have these clean images with so little light.
We have a little bit of noise because we are here in the live convention hall, so try and keep the mics up nice and close so our viewers at home can
How's
hear
that?
That you sound wonderful.
Fabulous.
Now. That's good. Almost too much good, Stephen, there. So whenever you're picking an LED light, because I think especially there's a whole array, and they run the gamut from extremely expensive to extremely affordable. What specs are you looking at? Or is it brand name? Is it price? Is it CRI? What are you looking at?
Well, one of the things, CRI is not necessarily an adequate measure. The Academy is working on a whole new way of going about evaluating the color rendition of an LED light. One of the things that LEDs do not emit a smooth spectrum that we're used to from our HMIs or our tungsten instruments. And so there will be peaks in the spectrums, and they will not be necessarily evenly spread out, so that your images will appear a different color to the camera than what they appear to the eye. And so that, again, I hate to come back to testing, but that is one of those that, particularly on the less expensive brands of LEDs, it's worth doing some testing on. And it's not that all of the inexpensive ones are not good, but it's one of those, take a look. And also for anybody who's interested in the area, visiting the Academy's website, they have a pretty good education on this.
Yeah, they really do. And in fact, one of the problems that we've had are the narrow band of the primaries, and we are now seeing there is a new patented system that includes a 4th primary, and it fits right within ACES. And it's beautiful because it expands each primary in a way that you can overcome some of the color problems that sometimes people don't see the certain colors because their eyes are tuned, their sensors are tuned a certain way, and this allows it to expand each color in a way that you can now experience the colors on a much more accurate level.
Yeah, to expand a little bit upon and a little background for what Stephen was talking about, one of the major TV manufacturers did a presentation at the ASC where they were talking about, this is trying to reach for Rec 2020 color spaces and monitors. And this is interesting because cinematography, as just a little side run, cinematography is now integrated into this whole ecosystem of not only acquisition but viewing. But what this manufacturer discovered was to get a bigger color space, they had to work with narrower primaries. And they were all of a sudden getting consumer complaints because people were saying, well, I just bought this new TV and it looks like it just doesn't, the colors don't look right. And what they came back to is that our functioning right now definition of color is really based on measurements that were done from a group of 50 white middle-aged males in the 1940s. And guess what? Again. The whole world does not perceive color the same way that a middle-aged white male does.
Especially as we get a little older, your eyes, the color response changes, and an older eye actually sees things warmer. So it changes those
Interesting.
standards.
I did not know that.
Yeah, it shifts that, and actually women tend to have much better color perception than men.
Of course.
Of course, I knew that.
So I'm not. I do want to just go back to my last question and try and just get some direct. I'm talking to you all. You're all 3 directors of photography, and that's your background, correct? Mm-hmm. So how, as you do evaluate an LED, I know that we don't effectively have testing measures yet. You're working on the new ones. What are you choosing, or what are you using to choose your LEDs?
I'm choosing the quality of light.
So you're going based on CRI in that point, or brand recognition?
No. I'm going on the shape and size of the instrument. Sometimes you need a very tiny light, sometimes you need, you know, broad and soft light, and it's I base it on the quality of the light coming out of the instrument, and that's why, you know, I could use, as I said, I could use a light gear strip, or I could use a big panel, or for instance, there are some very small instruments like dado lights.
Yes, absolutely.
Are wonderfully focusable small instruments that are very versatile, and they're cool because LEDs are run much cooler. You can actually hold it in your hand and operate that light. If you tried to do that with an incandescent
conventional
light,
dado, or like the original dados.
ouch, you know. But it's great, the spectrum of what we have in terms of the ability to light. The sky panels are incredible. The quasars are incredible. The controls, the effects that you can do are just, with one tube you can do dozens of different effects.
I want to move on to other questions, but I want to ask you two the same. What are you using to evaluate LED lights?
The same as Steven said. I like to get a sky panel anytime I can, and the quasars, the little tubes, they have like 5 different levels. You can, and the ribbons. Yeah, same.
Michael?
I'm a tester. I like to put things in, you know, I keep coming back to that, but I had these experiences, you know, particularly in commercials, where people want their logo color, or there'll be a particular trademark color on a tennis shoe, that they want that rendered accurately. And, you know, you really do need to go do testing. Obviously, the major brands of lights, you know, are much more predictable in that matter. And one of the wonderful things, really, that we didn't bring up about LEDs is that the idea they can be battery powered. And when you're working fast, or you're doing car interiors, this sort of thing, that's a remarkable bit of evolution.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to move on to virtual reality and compositing, and in the way I mean this is how compositing is now working on set. Like specifically, there's amazing tracking technology now, and it is used actively on set. Would you guys like to speak about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the ability to create a world within game engines is a brand new thing that we're adopting from the world of gaming. These game engines are so facile that you can then put a handheld camera on somebody's shoulder. You have the tracking marks on the ceiling on a green screen, and you are seeing instant compositing. When the camera moves, the reflections in a puddle move. When the shadow is supposed to move because the camera is moving, they move just like that. So the game engines are really a new, wonderful development.
Right, and to relate that back to, you know, conversation we had last year, back to like, how do you compare and contrast that when you go back to something like Stuart Little 2, where you were shooting before? How does that work in comparison to that?
Oh my gosh, if we would have had this systems like Lightcraft and a couple of the others on Stuart Little 2, we could have probably cut a third of the time that took to shoot that movie.
Yeah, no, in conversations with studio executives, they are seeing this technology as being able to significantly increase the amount of this kind of work that can be done on a TV series. So in other words, if a traditional series, the analogy that I heard, if a traditional series is budgeted for 50 shots an episode, that by doing the work on set, they're going to be able to increase that to 150. At the same budget level. And so I think that it's going to be something we're really going to see an adoption curve as writers start to catch on to the potentials of all of this. It's also much faster in terms of your editorial. We think of it on set. Oh, I'm seeing the image on set. But the other thing that you're doing sometime across this year, it's going to take a little bit more of an evolution in computer gear, but we're going to have finished compositing coming off of set. But even if it's not a finished composite, it's good enough to go straight to editorial, instead of editorial having to wait for VFX and the compositing process to really put the show together.
So I want to touch on one more thing here that I think is really important, because as technology grows, as the industry grows, and we are trying, obviously, I think industry-wide we should be fighting for more diversity and putting more people in positions of power to make more interesting and creative things than just the typical model has been. How do we enable younger people or people with less access or less affluence, less ability to be able to create something with all this new technology? So let me clarify one more time, so it's pretty vague. Back in the day when you were shooting and you wanted to become a director, you wanted to become a DP, you had to have a film camera, you had to do something, you had to have a crew, you had to have lights, you had to have a lot of power. Now that's not the case anymore. You have LEDs, you have a phone, you have a mirrorless camera, you can have access to all of this. So now what advice and how should young people be starting?
Tell stories. No matter what you do, no matter what technology you use, it's the storytelling ability that really counts. Whether you're a cinematographer as a storyteller, whether you're a director as a storyteller, that's the important thing. And we work with young people across the country to as an outreach to we as the union, this Local 600, the International Cinematographers Guild. There are programs in New York, there are programs in Los Angeles, Atlanta, even in Chicago, that outreach to younger filmmakers to bring them into the idea of this is the way it should be done, and then we make access available.
So I think you're saying just ask, get involved. If you have the inkling to do it, just ask, find someone, and generally the industry will push you in the right direction.
Well, I would say get out and do it,
Yeah.
and don't be afraid of your limitations. There are a range of inexpensive tools from your phone on up. There are a variety of online resources. I would encourage anyone who wants to be a cinematographer to become familiar with game engines. Not necessarily become an expert, but learn what they do, learn how it works, and learn how you can use that as a creative palette. All of that is available free online. Just go, and it's a matter of investing your time, but create images, tell stories, and tell them with whatever way you can. It's real interesting, and that's always been true, even though the economics are being more favorable. I remember when I was a college student, I had my little Super 8 film that did quite well, and it was standing against folks from larger film programs who had, couple $100,000 budgets for their films. And, where I was coming from as a student, my budgets were more like, $1,200.
We have, in the International Cinematographers Guild, we have a program that is called the Emerging Cinematographers Awards. Now, this is an award that is given to up to 10 people a year in our programs who are not yet directors of photography in the union, but who have shot shorts over the last year. And we are the only organization in the motion picture industry that honors our newest talent, as opposed to guys like me who get honors occasionally, but the older guys and the older women. But we take these people and give them a boost to their career right off the bat, and they're not even yet directors of photography. But this year we got over 100 entries from our members. We choose 10 of them. We show it in Los Angeles with a big reception afterwards. We show it in New York. We show it in Chicago. We show it in Atlanta. And then all of these films go to Camera in Poland, and we have a showing there. So it's a wonderful program and a wonderful opportunity for people to enter into the industry as directors of photography.
Yeah, the trailers are available online. So if somebody just searches for the Emerging Cinematographer Awards, you'll be able to get to the website, and it's some very remarkable work.
Sheila, what do you think?
Well, I think mentoring young people is really important. I always try to, if a young woman comes up to me and says, "Can you show me how to do Steadicam?" I'll have her come over. We work on the Steadicam. I try to get young women and men on the set as behind-the-scene operators. Just encourage them to just get a camera, any camera, shoot as much as you can. Work on your friends' movies, because you'll learn when you do lighting, you'll be a gaffer one day, and then when you're a DP, you'll realize what they're going through. So yeah, it's just you have to get experience any way you can. And as older people, I think we have to really make an effort to mentor the younger people and bring them on set.
Yeah, and we do have a mentoring program in Local 600 as well.
I genuinely want to thank all three of you for joining me here on Adorama Live and going through all of this. It's been very gracious of you to give us your time. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You can see all of our episodes of Adorama Live on nofilmschool.com, so please go join the conversations yourself by watching the videos and leaving a comment. I'll see you on the next episode of Adorama Live on No Film School.